views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to Higher TV on BronxNet, a program produced and hosted by college and high school interns who want to showcase culture, art, and politics happening here in the Bronx. I'm your host, Megan Kemp. Today, I will be speaking with Mimi Shelton, the Director of Trans Initiatives of Destination Tomorrow, about the violence, fear, and life-threatening struggles trans women of color deal with every day. Mimi, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you, Megan, and I am excited to be here.
I'm excited too. So I'd like to jump right into it. Destination Tomorrow is a nonprofit organization in the Bronx that provides helpful services for the LGBTQ plus community. Mimi, can you tell us about your role at Destination Tomorrow?
Absolutely. So first I'll start with Destination Tomorrow, right? So as you said, Destination Tomorrow is the Bronx LGBTQ Center. It is a support service and community-based organization at 3rd Avenue and 149th Street in the Bronx, right off the 25 train. Come visit us sometime, please. And we provide a host of services and have been providing them since 2012, really since 2009 when we formed, but 2012 is when we took over in the Bronx as the LGBTQ Center. So since then, we have been offering limited housing support. We have a 90-day emergency housing program for sex workers, as well as those in sex trafficking. We offer a lot of different services in terms of programmatic and grant-based services, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So that's Destination Tomorrow. And in terms of me, my name is Mimi Shelton. Again, as you said, I am the Director of Trans Initiatives at Destination Tomorrow, the Bronx LGBT Center. And I'm looking forward to being here and answering questions.
That's amazing. What services does Destination Tomorrow provide for trans women of color specifically?
So yeah, I talked about them, a couple of them just now, but I'll think about the services as a whole. As a whole, we offer a host of services for all LGBTQ individuals, but when we're talking about trans women of color particularly, I'm thinking of the gender affirming care that we provide for individuals. So that includes PEP and PrEP navigation, that includes support with signing up for insurance, support with signing up for food pantry services or food benefits based on social services with New York City or New York State. We help to get individuals signed up for Care and or some other based Medicaid insurance, for gender affirming surgeries, which we also help individuals navigate the process for that with some of our community partners. And we get individuals signed up for PCPs as well, so primary care physicians, as well as connected to other behavioral health and mental health services. Apart from the social services side of things, we also offer programmatic events for trans women of color and for trans individuals specifically. Again, that falls in line with my area, as well as outreach, as well as our director of programs. So some of those things look like a girls support group. So I lead that on Wednesdays at 5:30, and that is a virtual support group weekly as a peer discussion space to support one another and talk about the experiences of being trans. Cis women are also included in the conversation, especially those who are LGBTQ plus identified. In addition to those services, at the moment, currently, Destination Tomorrow is the only Black-led grant-making agency on the Northeast, and I am in charge of, along with Sean Ebony Coleman, our executive director, founder and executive director, I should say. He and I are both partners working to manage the Gilead Sciences-funded Transcend Community Impact Fund, which actually is a grant that is distributed to, based on an application process, TGNC-led agencies throughout the nation who do work around the social determinants of HIV and HIV work, or social determinants that will lead to a higher infection rate of HIV or risk thereof. So that's some of the services we offer for trans women of color. At the moment, one thing I'm pretty excited about is our switch housing. So that's sex workers immediate temporary comprehensive housing. It's a 90-day program for sex workers who are ages 25, or not sex workers alone, but individuals who've had a history in sex work or in sex trafficking who are ages 25 and up. It's a 90-day emergency housing program. There's a qualification process. And so in order to be eligible, really come do an intake in DT or schedule a virtual intake and go from there. And if you're eligible, you will be able to move in. And that's another project I'm more recently excited about, especially because housing is one of the most essential needs. When you're not housed, when you're not fed, those are some of the most essential things that lead to a person's being at high risk for any kind of violence, discrimination, and or illness. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's truly amazing, like how much help you provide for the LGBTQ plus community. Moving on, I read an article on Forbes that said in 2021, 375 transgender people were murdered globally, and 96% of these victims were trans women, and most of them were also Black women. Why do you think we're seeing such high rates of violence and death specifically for trans women, or I'm sorry, for Black trans women compared to other races?
That's a great question. I think the first one, I have two responses to that. My first, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, right? Which has led many countries, including our own, to economic instability, social instability and unrest, political instability and unrest, as well as other factors that have been impacted, right? Medical and a person's wellness. So because of that factor, when you have human suffering, more than likely there's going to be heightened conditions of oppression or crime, right? And this is speaking as a scholar who has done research around experiences of LGBTQ plus violence, particularly those at the intersections of race and gender and sexuality, but also as a person who is watching the high crime rates going on at this very moment for communities, especially those that are Black and brown, especially those that are TGNC, that's trans and gender nonconforming, and particularly at the intersections of those identities. So I think literally it's a way of people taking out their aggression on those who are most vulnerable, right? I think that happens to children. I think that happens to our elderly. I think that happens to our homeless populations. Any vulnerable community and population who others see as less than, especially in these times where others are suffering, are more than likely going to be the targets of some kind of release of that frustration. I think the second part is particularly the fact that there is a level of objectification of any Black trans person, Black trans woman, particularly. I mean, women are already objectified themselves. Black people, as a history, have been considered objects, or at least, secondary, tertiary citizens at times. So when you cross those two over, not only do you have LGBTQ populations that are oftentimes in the mainstream white, ignoring ignoring the violence against Black trans individuals, or at least saying, well, that's not me and I'm going to distance myself from that. But you also have Black cis individuals or Black communities that are like, well, they're bringing this violence on themselves. So I think that, again, it's that idea that people think we're worthy of our own deaths and our own violence and the own actions that come against us. So for me, I would say those are two of the biggest factors right now, the pandemic as a whole, but then also the fact that there is a history of objectification and no one is exempt from violence. And unfortunately, because no one is exempt from violence, at times like this, those that are most targeted are going to be trans women of color. Let's also not forget, we have a very heightened visibility, I will say, of women of color and trans women of color in the media at this moment. And even though we're seeing that centrality in media, that's while it's going to breed some celebration, it will also engender hate, and an individual is more likely to take that hate out on their neighbor than on the person who they see on the screen and don't have access to.
Those were really great points, and I completely agree. And that's exactly why I wanted to do this segment, because I don't believe enough people are helping trans women of color and are aware of like what they are going through every single day. So I think you made some really amazing points. Um, so in America, the life expectancy of a Black trans woman is 35 years old. And this is due to the murder, neglect, and discrimination that these women are facing every single day. Do you have any tips on some ways that trans women of color can try to keep themselves safe from this awful tragedy, and ways for allies to help out, and like, what we can do to be a great ally for the community?
I think I would turn that question around a bit. Not again, no offense at all, but I would say I think we should focus more on what can society do to make sure and ensure that trans women of color make it to 35, rather than placing that onus on the individual themselves. I think we in America in general are overwhelmingly culturally and more easily place the blame on the victim and the individual than on the structures and the conditions of society in which we live. So I would say I would flip that question, and the onus is on policymakers, right? What kind of policies are you creating to make sure there's street safety? What kind of policies are you making to make sure that there's safety in transportation, that there are safe spaces, adequate resources? I know myself today, I'm going to a rally with other assembly members and community-based organizations, and we are rallying for $15 million in support from the state for TGNC-led agencies and wellness. And I say all that to say, again, there needs to be very tangible infrastructural as well as structural, in terms of political structural and policy-based interventions that are most important for our survival. Because to be honest with you, there really isn't anything that the individual can do, right? None of us, as I said before, are exempt from violence. None of us are exempt from hurt and pain. And I don't say that to scare anyone. I say that to say, as a woman who's walked through those consequences and who has suffered that discrimination in order to be the person who I am today, I understood going through my journey that I wasn't exempt from that pain. However, I know that that pain could have been alleviated if there wasn't so much discrepancy and discrimination that takes place in the care of Black trans women and Black trans lives. So again, I think the onus is on the policy and on the people who are creating those structures, rather than on the individuals.
That was such a great take on that question. Thank you for joining me to discuss this really important topic. If you look at the screen below, you can find where to reach Destination Tomorrow. Mimi, thank you so, so much. This was so great to hear from you.
Yeah, no problem at all. And please, anybody, everyone, definitely feel free to reach me at mimi@destinationtomorrow.org. Visit our website, find our services. And if you have any questions, give us a call as well, 646-723-3325. Have a great day, Megan.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining me here today at Higher TV. I'm your host, Megan Kemp, and I'll see you next time.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Higher TV. I'm Flora Lenahan, and today I'd like to hold a conversation about the Don't Say Gay law that was recently passed in Florida. So this law says that LGBTQ identities, including sexuality and gender expression, cannot be discussed in Florida public schools for kindergartners through third graders. So with me, I would like to introduce my good friend, Joie St. Hubert, to talk about our reactions to this law. Hi, Joie. Thanks for joining me today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Great. So very excited to have this conversation with you. I'd love to start out by hearing, what were your initial reactions to hearing that this law was passed?
Well, I very unfortunately, was not surprised, which is so, I hate even saying that. But I was very angry because I feel like LGBTQ students don't have enough safety as it is, in schools or in the world, period. And also having I have lots of friends that live in Florida. that, I knew would be affected by this. And so I was really scared and worried and upset and in shock and just a lot of negative emotions.
Same for me.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear as well. Could you share a bit about your experience growing up in school? Would you say that you had access to safe spaces to discuss LGBTQ identities?
Well, growing up, no. The short answer is no. I grew up in Catholic school my whole life. I went to Catholic elementary school, middle school, high school, Christian college, the whole 9 yards. And I in elementary school and middle school and high school, we had sex ed. It was straight sex ed. And there, and obviously in the Catholic faith, there are very clear things that state, that they have an issue with homosexuality, or that's what they say. And I knew in these schools that there were certain professors that I could talk to because they made it known that I was safe. Which also I think is a whole entire issue within itself. But in classes or in schools or in learning environments, I never really felt safe because they were primarily religious learning environments.
Got it.
So I never really got to talk about my sexuality, explore my sexuality with peers or professors or anyone. So I kind of felt like I was on my own. I kind of felt alone there.
So would you say that having access to a safe space and being able to be out to, say, friends of yours or teachers, would that have helped you, especially at a young age, like being in those years of kindergarten to third grade?
Definitely. I think if I had the exposure that I wished I had to, like learning about the LGBTQ community and things like that, I think I definitely would have been more comfortable and out at a much younger age. But I really did feel like, there was a kind of a lid was put on my coming out process, my journey, my self-identity journey. And I think it's incredibly important that people actively create safe spaces for LGBTQ students or people, because there's really not enough of those. And also the fact that we exist and we're not going anywhere, and we will always exist. We have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's obviously not something that people are aware of. People just think that we go away. Poof. But that, we're always going to be here, and we're people just like the rest of the world. And it's also fair that we have safe spaces like everybody else, and that we have access to all the things that everybody else has access to.
Right. So, good point.
Yeah.
So I remember last year you shared with me that you were outspoken about your transgender identity at your Christian university, but they silenced you even to the point of suspension. So could you share a bit about how that affected you? And how do you think LGBTQ youth in Florida would feel knowing that this happened to you?
Well, yes, I was suspended from Lee University in September of 2021. And I started there in the fall of 2018. I started there, and when I started, I identified as a cis bisexual woman. And, my time progressed. I came out as trans in December of 2021. And, I knew that Lee was an unsafe campus. I knew it was not an affirming school in some ways, but I didn't truly, I think, see or notice how unsafe it was until I came out as trans, which was my junior year. And just a couple months after I came out as trans, there was a chapel service that the school president held in which he basically condemned the entire LGBTQ community and said, we don't condone same-sex attraction. And that was really the day that I realized I was like, and the day that a lot of LGBTQ students came to me and were like, Joie, this is terrifying. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to. And I was obviously in shock and I was angry and I was hurt. But honestly, a lot of me was just, I wanted to channel this anger and hurt and shock into making it a safe space and trying to make it a safer environment as best as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I connected with LGBTQ students and I protested in my own way and, through my social media platforms, and directly tagged them in everything because they need to see it. But it really did, the suspension, it really did, it came out of the blue, but it also didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I was it took all of less than an hour for them to tell me, hey, we don't like what you're advocating for. You're advocating for the wrong things, and fully take away my education. And, and that took so little time. And it's not fair. No student should have their education compromised for
Right.
being who they are. That's
Right.
not fair. And kids in Florida, I'm sure are absolutely terrified. School is definitely not a safe space anymore at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so scary. It's so scary to like wake up every day and know that your existence and identity and just who you are is actively like trying to be erased by people. And it's just, I just want kids in Florida to know that they're not alone. They're not alone in this, and that I am available and I will actively hold and make safe space for LGBTQ youth everywhere. And
That's so great.
yeah.
I'm so glad that you're using your own voice as a form of activism, and that you're creating communities for those around you and making people feel like they're supported and safe. That's very admirable.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much, Joie St. Hubert, for joining me. This has been an excellent conversation.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Great. So this is a segment of Higher TV about the Don't Say Gay law that was recently passed in Florida. Thank you, Joie, for joining us. Take care, everyone.